Welcome to the Walled Garden Podcast. Here we nourish the gardens of our minds, one meaningful conversation at a time. If you'd like to find out more, go to thewalledgarden.com. Thanks for joining us. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of the Walled Garden Podcast. Before I jump into the episode, I just want to mention if you head to thewalledgarden.com/events, you'll see that we're putting together a few events over the month of June. One of them is with Sharon LaBelle coming up this week, actually. It's entitled On Holiness. Why is it important? What is it? How can it transform our lives? So you can go there and register for that event. And if you've ever been to an event with Sharon LaBelle, you know that you always walk away from that experience feeling enriched in so many ways. And we're also going to be putting together some more events towards the end of June and many exciting things coming up in July. So make sure that you subscribe to the Garden Pickings email newsletter that we send out weekly. That's a great place for you to be able to hear first about the extremely exciting updates that we have coming to the Walled Garden. I just can't wait to share all of this with you guys because there's so much good stuff coming. But nonetheless, for today's episode, this is a conversation with Dr. Bruce Tallman. And so Bruce actually emailed me a few months back, and he introduced his book to me. It's called God's Ecstatic Love, Transform Your Life with a Spiritual Masterpiece. And so I checked out his work, and I know that he writes a lot of poetry as well, and he's quite a well-acclaimed author in his field. And I thought, man, I'd love to talk to this guy. And we had this conversation, and I have to say, after talking with Bruce, I just felt like if every conversation on this podcast can go like this one that I just had with Dr. Tallman, I would be a very happy man, and I think that you'd all be happy listeners as well. And so he really set a standard because I just had such a fun time exploring these profound ideas around the spiritual path, around what God is, what it would mean to love God, to be loved by God. You know, these very interesting theological and spiritual questions that relate to the spiritual traveler, you might say. And they're all things that I'm exploring at the moment. As you know, studying divinity. This is supposed to be my wheelhouse, and so I find it to be so joyful when I come across another fellow seeker, traveler on this path who is so open to discussing these topics with, that expert knowledge, but also that openness to continue to learn, to continue to grow. And I'm sure that all of you will find that same spirit in Dr. Tallman. So I do want to tell you a little bit about Bruce before we dive in. So since 2002, Dr. Bruce Tallman has been a full-time spiritual director and marriage coach in private practice. He's passionate about his mission, which is to help people to grow in wisdom and love. In spiritual direction, he's worked with laity and clergy from every Christian denomination. He's published 2 books for spiritual directors, one of them Finding Seekers, How to Develop a Spiritual Direction Practice from Beginning to Full-Time Employment, is a bestseller in the field. He has also published 2 books on spirituality for clergy and lay people. He has had hundreds of articles on spirituality published in the London Free Press and other newspapers, and is an adjunct faculty for the Hayden Institute for Spiritual Directors Training. And so, as I mentioned earlier, he does have a new book out called God's Ecstatic Love, and I really hope that you go out and get that, go follow his work, and I just really hope that we get to see a lot more of Dr. Bruce Tallman on this show because I had such a pleasure talking to him. And it's without further ado that I present to you Dr. Bruce Tallman. So, Bruce, firstly, I just want to say welcome to the Walled Garden Podcast. It's a real honor to have you here. And I guess in order to set us up for the kind of conversation that we'll have today. I think I wanted to mention something that I was thinking about the other night, something that kind of really jumped out as me as somewhat of an epiphany moment. And it was, we currently live in a world where we have these strange structures of authority, and especially in the very materialistic scientific worldview that we have today, it's really easy for us all to place the authoritative weight in our current world on scientists.
Right.
And I don't know how much you know of my own path, but I'm currently studying a Master of Divinity. And one of the reasons why I decided to do that was, and I think it's occurring to me more and more, there was sort of a leap of faith that I took where I started to see, hang on, we look at scientists, they have a very specific role, they have a very specific method, and we say, they have a certain authority in their approach. But if you jump over into the realm of theology and religion, there are experts, people over in this field who are spending their entire lives trying to figure out the architecture of God, the metaphysics of religion and belief and value and wisdom and virtue. Yet, do we place that same level of authority on people like them? I think because we're in that current scientific materialistic worldview, I have been trapped in that side of thinking for so long. But I had to leap over and say, oh my gosh, there is an entire field here dedicated to pursuing knowledge of God. And there are thousands and thousands of scholars and thousands of people dedicating their entire lives to this pursuit. And my sense of you is that you're one of those people who is truly trying to dedicate yourself to that pursuit of a knowledge of God. And so with that said, that was kind of my epiphany the other night, where I thought, man, this is such a rich topic, and I'm really excited to be here with you to throw some questions your way. But I guess to start off with, would you like to just introduce yourself for the audience who will be listening at home, and maybe tell us who you are and why we're here?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me, Simon. This is wonderful. I work as a spiritual director, basically a spiritual counselor. I also do a lot of marriage preparation. And I'm a writer, and I've written 4 books, and one of them, Finding Seekers, is kind of a bestseller in the field of spiritual direction. I've had hundreds of articles published in our local paper, the London Free Press. London is a city of about 400,000 people. And let's see what else. I've been married for 45 years. I have 3 adult children. I'm trying to be a lover of God, whatever that means. I mean, that might, be different for each person. In spiritual direction, I work mainly with clergy and from all Christian denominations. Although I've also worked with some Jewish people and with some atheists, which is always interesting. I mean, with atheists, I just ask them, okay, what gives your life meaning? What is your purpose, and what brings you joy, and those kind of things. Those are all spiritual questions. So I took some training. I did a master's of religious studies at the University of Toronto, and I did a Doctor of Ministry degree in spiritual direction with the Graduate Theological Foundation, which is at Notre Dame University in the States. I've been doing spiritual direction and marriage coaching full-time I'm in my 20th year now. I can't think of better work to do, preparing engaged couples for the most serious commitment of their life, marriage. And and also helping clergy with, just surviving as a clergy person, which can be really challenging for them. And it's a really difficult job, actually. So, yeah, that's a little bit about my background. I'm Roman Catholic, although sometimes I feel a bit fringe as a fringe Roman Catholic, given all the scandals that have gone on in the Catholic Church. I'm almost embarrassed to call myself a Catholic these days. But as far as the question of authority goes, for Catholics, there's the Pope and the bishops and the priests and so on. Our approach to science would be that science is important, and the Catholic Church has no problem with science or even the theory of evolution, as long as you don't leave God out of the whole picture. Maybe God is behind evolution. So, is that enough of an answer?
I think so. Yeah. No, it's, and so as I said, I'm looking forward to diving into this conversation, because you do have such a rich experience. You have an experience as the, you might say the scholar, the writer, but also the advisor, which is beautiful. Also the practitioner. So, very all-round spiritual teacher, you might say. I wanted to, I guess, start by asking about something that someone mentioned to me recently. I've been speaking a lot with this poet over in Perth here in Australia, and we both seem to be drinking from the same well when it comes to our poetry that we're writing, and so the symbolism is all very unified. And he was saying to me, like you've said in your book, that this idea of love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and this idea that love others as you love yourself, basically sums up the entire book of the prophets and the law. And I believe you actually said it sums up the entire Bible. Everything else is commentary.
That's right.
I want to understand that idea better. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, in Christian terms, we believe Jesus was God incarnate, and his greatest commandment was to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second commandment, he said, was very similar. It's love others as you love yourself. And you really can't separate those three things: loving God, loving others, and loving yourself. That's what all of Scripture is pointing towards, is, learning to love God and love others. And however that looks for each individual, there should also be social justice in there, because, sin and evil are not just individual, but they also can be corporate or communal, and so we need to look at that. How are the structures of society set up to favor the rich and discriminate against the poor and people of color and so on? So white supremacy, particularly in the States and somewhat in Canada, has been a real problem, and we're finally becoming more aware of, just how big a problem it is, and how privileged white people are. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Simon.
Well, let me expand upon that, because you said that there's no difference necessarily between loving others and loving God. Now, what I'm guessing that an atheist might be listening and thinking, okay, well, and even I would ask the question, how is there no separation there? What is the major connection that you see?
Right. These are really good questions. Yeah, I mean, in a way, they are kind of inseparable. I mean, we show our love of God by loving other people and by loving our true self, not our false self. I mean, the true self is the image and likeness of God within you, that you were created in by God. The false self would be the ego. But yeah, I mean, if, I don't know if you know Richard Rohr at all. He's kind of a famous North American Franciscan, very wise Christian. He wrote a book called The Universal Christ. And so the idea is that the universal Christ is everywhere. I mean, the universe is the body of God. The universe is the body of Christ. And so Christ is everywhere. Christ is in me. Christ is in you. Christ is in everybody, every creature. And so, yeah, it's really hard to separate them. I was thinking about this question today, like an atheist might say, okay, well, I don't believe in God, but, I'm a good person. I love other people. I strive for justice. So what would be, why do I need God? And I would say that we all need God. We need to be divinized. I mean, that's the difference between just humanism and Christianity, I think, is that, the goal of life is to be fully human. And we can't really do that, I think, unless we have a relationship with God, and we realize that God is within me. And the idea is to be full of God, really. I think that's the purpose of life. And if you're full of God, you'll be loving towards others and yourself and the whole creation, hopefully. Yeah. So I think it is, when you're talking about love, it's hard to separate out loving God from loving other people, from loving yourself, from loving the creation. I mean, it's really, I think God is loving other people through me, and God is loving me through other people, so it's very, if God is incarnate as well as transcendent, then it is pretty hard to separate. So
yeah, and I think I'm just trying to wrap my head around this idea. And one thing that I might add to it, you mentioned this idea that the ego is almost the false self that we perhaps fall in love with. That makes intuitive sense to me. And I'll try and recall something that I read from St. Ephraim, the Assyrian, last night. He wrote something like, it was in one of his prayers, and I'm not going, actually, I think I might actually just have it right here, which might just be helpful. Yes, I think I do. Actually, no, I'm not going to take the time to find that. Nonetheless, it was in one of his prayers, and he said something like, keep me from vain curiosity. And as soon as I read that, oh man, I really recognize that within myself, vain curiosity, the kind of curiosity where you want to pursue a certain line of inquiry because of who it might make you seem to other people. You want to put yourself off as, well, look at me, I'm exploring this idea. Look at how wise I am. And I really recognize that in myself sometimes. And so when you say, ego is the false self, that to me seems like moments when I'm almost falling in love with the ego that wants to be praised, and that is driving me towards things that might actually be somewhat good, the pursuit of this sort of wisdom, but you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Am I along the right sort of lines there and how you're thinking about those two selves?
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, we need our ego just to survive in the world. But if that's all that's happening in us is just all this ego stuff, then we're in trouble, I think. So I mean, I think everybody has curiosity, and I don't know if that comes from the ego. It would come from the ego if, yeah, you want to make yourself look brilliant because you know certain things. You know, as it says somewhere in Scripture, knowledge can puff us up. Love builds up, knowledge puffs up. And so, yeah, if you're seeking knowledge out of vanity, you know, out of wanting to look good, that would be the ego.
Yeah.
A key distinction I make in my book is the difference between being drawn by God and being driven by your ego. And, you know, if you're feeling driven about something, it's probably your ego at work. If you're feeling drawn by God, so God kind of lures us forward by giving us, you know, inspirations and, you know, counsels and things that, you know, make us see how we could be, how we could develop a lot more. We could become much more holy and virtuous and so on. So, yeah. So again, if you're feeling driven, Simon, it would be your ego. If you're feeling drawn, it's probably God.
I think that's a really interesting distinction to draw. And I would certainly say that, you know, there are many times where I have felt very puffed up, as you might say, you know, like, and my wife can attest to that, right? But it's something that I'm working on because I at the same time, like, I felt the drivenness, right? I felt that, you know, I used to work in the gym industry, and I kind of look back with horror, looking at the way that I really approached moving into. So we built a new gym, and I was the manager of that gym, and I went into that town and I was like, I'm gonna crush the competition. I was there for battle. I was there for war. I was ready. You know, every day I was on social media pushing the club out there, and that was my time of being driven. Now I ended up quitting my job because I felt deeply called to something else, right? Now, along the past few years, I have experienced moments of both drivenness and also moments of deep calling, which is why on the website now I write that, you know, I'm a philosopher in my heart, a poet by calling, and a musician in my being. And so I wanted to ask you about that, because you write in your book that you felt called to write this book. And I think this is something that might seem very foreign to a lot of people, this idea that we might feel called towards something. How does a person recognize that?
Well, as somebody said, if God is calling you, first God taps you on the shoulder, you know. And if you don't get that, if you don't turn around, and, you know, then God, you know, taps you on the side of the cheek. And if you don't get that, God hits you in the forehead with a 2x4. So I would say that
I think he skipped the steps for me.
If you feel like the same thing is coming up over and over again, that's probably God calling you. You know, in the Bible, I mean, if anything is said 3 times, it's like the maximum. You can't say it anymore. And so if God gives you 3 callings, that's for sure God calling you. I mean, it's a very subtle thing to be called to something. It's just, you know, you might start daydreaming about it or having dreams about it. I mean, God speaks to us through our dreams and through our daydreams. And for example, back when I became a Catholic, my priest immediately put me in charge of Bible study for the parish, and he kept loading stuff on me, and it became like a full-time job. And I already had a full-time job working in social services, and you know, I started daydreaming about maybe I could work for some diocese somewhere, and I think that was the calling, because that's what I ended up doing. I mean, I spent 14 years working for the Roman Catholic Diocese of London in adult religious education. So, yeah, I mean, I was being called to that and being, you know, kind of drawn towards that before I even, you know, submitted a resume and applied for a job in that field. Um, so, being called is something you can't get off your mind very easily. It just keeps coming back to you in different forms. But you may get signs, although you have to be careful with signs because you can read into signs very easily. There's a little joke I'll just quickly tell you. It's in my book about how this farmer and his son were working in the field, and the son really wanted to go out and spread the gospel and preach Christ, you see, and the farmer wanted his son to stay on the farm and, work with them. And so they were out in the field, and the son said, "Look, Father, those clouds are forming a P and a C. That means that God wants me to preach Christ." And the farmer said, "No, that means God wants you to plant corn." You see? So you can read into signs whatever you want, but you can consult your head, your heart, and your gut. You consult key people in your life. In this case, if you're married, it would be your wife, or if you're a priest, it would be your bishop. Ask them what they think about this thing that you think you're being called to, and pray about it, journal about it, make a pros and cons list. There's ways of discerning what you're being called to, is what I'm saying. And that, in summary, was kind of the means of St. Ignatius of Loyola, his way of discerning whether you're called to something. So you consult the key people, you pray about it, you think about it. If you aren't getting any, you start with your heart, and if your heart is, you're feeling a lot of consolation when you think, he said you should first of all narrow things down to two options. And if you feel a lot of consolation, a lot of positive feelings about one option, and you're feeling desolation about the other option, then, it's probably God is calling you to the first option, the ones where you're feeling the positive emotions about. But if you're not getting anything from the heart level, then you go to your head and you make a pros and cons list, and with the idea, okay, where can I serve God the most? And, one con could outweigh 10 pros, or one pro could outweigh 10 cons. And then if you don't get any answers from your heart or your head, then you go to your gut. What are your instincts telling you? Or what is your intuition telling you? And hopefully between your head, heart, and gut, you're getting some answers. And if you're not, then you go to key people in your life, trusted friends, people who know you well. Tell them about what you're feeling called to, and what do they think of it? Would this be a good match for you or not? And then after that, you look for signs. Looking for signs is kind of the last thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have so many questions on that. Because I studied the Old Testament prophets last semester at university, and my sense of the prophets was that they didn't call upon anybody to tell them what their purpose was, but it was like, nope, direct line to God. That's it. I don't care what you say. I don't care what you say. I'm just speaking directly through, and so obviously not everybody is a prophet, so not everybody has that calling, right? But I guess what you're saying is find ways of having some sound discernment in your life through the people around you, and I would say that's also a difficult game, because the people around you may not know your path as much as you would hope that they would, and therefore you have to, it seems to me like you always have to come back to, do I have a sophisticated philosophical foundation within me to be able to discern these things correctly? And I would say that, like, this is certainly a challenge that I have found as a highly creative individual, and this is a challenge that so many highly creative individuals face, which is that you're going to find patterns and commonalities everywhere. You're going to find these patterns. You're going to find these signs, because you're a creative person. That's exactly what the mind does if you're an artist. And so you can't help but just feeling as, oh my gosh, there's patterns everywhere. So
Hmm.
I really have to ground myself sometimes and find a deeper philosophical foundation upon which I can stand to say, okay, that's a real pattern. That's some sort of artistic pursuit. That's this, that's
Yeah.
that. Um, but let me quickly ask you, and you may comment on anything I just said there as well. But
Sure.
you mentioned that in the Bible, it's like 3 times. That's about as many as you're going to get. And I always remember to my own upbringing in the Mormon church that one of the part of the doctrine was that uh, to receive a witness, but then to deny it is pretty much the only thing that's going to get you into out of darkness, which is, hell for the Mormons essentially.
Okay.
And even though I've since left the church, something about that doctrine has always stuck with me. It's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's similarities there between this idea that, okay, 3 times, that's it. I wonder if you could maybe comment on that.
Um, yeah. Just frame the question again.
Sure. I guess I'm wondering what you think about this idea that there's a certain amount of times God might tap you on the shoulder or hit you over the head, but then
Oh,
it's like, okay, you've denied this many times, or for the Mormons, it's like you have a witness, you deny it once, right? And that's it. Um, I know I don't have the theological sophistication to go deeper into those ideas, but I guess my question is something like, could you comment on this idea that there is a certain amount of times and then God might pull back, essentially?
yeah. I would think it would depend upon how important what God is calling you to is. I mean, yeah, things often occur in threes in the Bible, but God may call you many more times than that. And there's sort of degrees of being called too. I mean, if you think of St. Paul being knocked off his horse, on the road to Damascus, I mean, that was like being hit in the head with a 2x4. That was that kind of, I mean, sometimes you just know for sure what God wants you to do. There's no question, it's just obvious. Other times it's more subtle. You're really confused. And, that again is when you go to your heart and ask, okay, where are you feeling consolation or desolation? And you even have to be careful with that because, something might feel really good, but maybe it's not the best thing for you. Or
Yeah.
something might feel really bad, but maybe it is the best thing for you. Like, for example, studying for medical exams might be really hard and, stressful, but maybe that's the best thing for you. Maybe that's what God is calling you to. And going out and partying all the time may feel really good, but maybe that's not the best thing, So, this is why it helps to have spiritual advisors. If you're involved in a church, to go to your priest or minister, or talk to a spiritual director. I mean, that's kind of what spiritual directors specialize in, is helping people discern what God is calling them to, or what God is calling them to let go of. I mean, maybe God wants you to let go of some stuff too, So maybe God called you to let go of your former religious upbringing, Yeah.
Well, man, I appreciate you letting me almost use this interview as a spiritual guidance session. This is great. But maybe if we could take a right turn here over to something else that you mentioned in your book. My sense is that you mentioned something very interesting to me, which was, I'm going to paraphrase here. Essentially, I believe you were saying that we can no longer live in a world wherein we assert the supreme authority of any one religion, but we need to open that umbrella and see, okay, there's universal truths in all of these different religions.
Yeah.
We need to find those and bring them together. And you said something like, that's actually what Christ would have wanted as well.
Yeah.
And so, as a practicing Roman Catholic, I think that's really interesting because so many people who I know, and also I know that it would be a general atheistic stance to have, would be, um, well, okay, well, if you're in one religion, then you must, of course, believe that that's the only one true religion. But my sense, getting to know a lot more religious people, I mean, I'll let you know that in the Walled Garden, to my two co-founders, I'm not currently practicing Christian, but I understand that I'm Christian to the core, because I grew up as a Christian and it's in my bones.
Yeah.
But I'm also working with Sharon LaBelle, who is a Jewish Stoic, working with Kai Whiting, who is an Islamic Stoic, and we all share this common love of the beauty that religion can bring into the world, but also the beauty of philosophy as a tool for understanding religious practices. And so I wanted to ask you, could you expand a bit upon that idea that actually Christ would have wanted us to open that umbrella and see, okay, there's beauty and value in all of these religions. We need to no longer be at war, but at peace with each other.
Yeah. So in Vatican II, from 1962 to 65, there was a gathering of about 2,500 bishops, and they decided that, there's truth in other religions, not just Christianity. Just in a nutshell, there's 4 approaches to truth. One is that nothing is true. One is that everything is true, which would be the extreme liberal approach, I guess. Then there's black and white truth. We have all the truth. You don't have any truth. And then there's a degrees of truth approach. A degrees of truth approach allows you to be committed and open to other traditions at the same time. You see, like I'm Catholic, not because I think Catholicism is the one true church and everybody else is going to hell. I mean, that would be ridiculous. But I believe there's more truth in Christianity, in Catholicism, than, say, in Protestantism or the Orthodox tradition. And I believe there's more truth in Christianity than, say, in Buddhism or Judaism or Islam. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a Christian Catholic, but that doesn't mean I can't learn from all these other traditions. I mean, I've really come to appreciate Judaism more and more. I mean, they're the rock we're standing on as Christians, really. Without them, we wouldn't have a faith, really. And I've always been interested in Buddhism, and right now my own spiritual director is a Sufi, a Muslim mystic, because the Sufis are all about loving God, and that's what my book is about, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to love God, so I thought I'd go to the experts. So yeah, a degrees of truth approach allows you to be committed to your tradition, but open to learning from other traditions. And as long as you allow other people to say a Jewish person might say, well, I find more truth in Judaism than in Christianity or in Buddhism, or a Muslim might say, I find more truth in Islam than in, Hinduism or Wiccaism or whatever. So I find a degrees of truth really a helpful approach. And, the Dalai Lama said that you shouldn't dig 10 shallow wells. You should dig one deep well. That way you'll reach the underground stream, and his analogy was that this is how you can approach religion. You should go deep in one tradition and you'll hit the underground stream that, unites all the traditions. I mean, the underground stream being God, however you conceive of God. Whereas if you dig 10 shallow, wells, I mean, if you dabble in this religion and that religion, and you end up with kind of just surface religion, or you're just making up your own religion, really. There's no tradition to it. So he said it's important to be committed to one tradition, but to go really deep into it. And the deeper you go, the closer you get to the universal underground stream, which is God. So
Yeah.
I hope
Well, I
that's
find
helpful.
that, yeah, it's very helpful. And I find it very inspiring. And I hope other people find it inspiring that you, a Roman Catholic, spiritual advisor, academic, book writer, have a Sufi spiritual advisor. I mean, that's so important for people to recognize, and for me to recognize as well, that um, and it speaks to that idea that we're all trying to dig our wells in our various traditions, but we're trying to reach that same stream. Yeah, I think that is such a beautiful analogy. Wow, you know.
Yeah, yeah. A key thing would be, to ask, okay, is this tradition making me a more loving and wise person? I mean, that's the bottom line, really. If it's not making you more loving and wise, maybe you need to check out some other religious tradition, and yeah.
And there's a
So,
challenge, right? I mean,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but like
no, go ahead.
I think in the West we have a real fascination with the exotic, the other tradition. We want to go look at Taoism and Buddhism and
Yeah.
even things like Islam, and we want to go outside of the walls of our tradition. And I
Mhm.
mean, it seems to me like that's a very natural thing to want, because even within the story of the stories of the Bible, there are these figures who go outside the garden walls, you might say, and bring back
Yeah,
something of value to their tradition.
sure.
But I've been thinking this lately. It's like, if my foundation is Christian,
Mm. Yeah.
why would I feel the need to go outside of that tradition, other than just to keep on digging within that tradition, like you say, to find that wellspring? And it's just
Yeah.
interesting to me that we do have this desire to go outside, and that's good. But at the same time, are we missing something by not seeing that what we're looking for is right here? Perhaps if we'll
Yeah.
find the right congregation or the right teacher or the right advisor,
Yeah. As Richard Rohr said in one of his books or articles, he said, the mysticism that sort of drew people to the Eastern religions, that's all in Christianity. I mean, it's right
Yeah.
here. We've just lost the mystical tradition since the birth of science, really, because, like you said, we're all into this materialistic sort of scientific mindset. And I mean, I don't know if you know Thomas Merton, but Merton
I've
and
heard the name.
Rohr,
Yeah.
yeah, they're kind of, I consider, Merton passed away, I think in 1958 or 68. And Richard Rohr is kind of the modern Thomas Merton, but Thomas Merton has really revived Christian mysticism and Christian contemplation. Again, a lot of this stuff is very similar, but the bottom line is this making you more loving and wise, um, and you could find that in more love and wisdom in pretty much any tradition. But again, I believe there are degrees of truth, and there is objective truth out there. So yeah, you can spend your whole life trying to find it. Of course, it's an ongoing journey,
Yeah.
For all of us.
100%.
Anybody who isn't wrestling with their faith in the 21st century is, they must not be awake.
Yeah.
Because, the thing that's happened is with immigration and travel, I mean, we're rubbing, shoulders now with people from other faiths. So, for example, in my own city of 400,000, 1 out of 10 people here is Muslim. The second most common language in London, Ontario, where I live, the first most common language is English, but the second most common language is Arabic. And then after that, it's Spanish.
Yeah.
And we're living in this French, Canadian, English, Canadian culture, but French is, it's not even in the top 3 languages here where I live. So, yeah. So because we're in contact with, and now with the internet, and Zoom, we can be in touch with people all over the world, and it's a very different ballgame than it was 50 years ago before the internet. And now we have unlimited information at our fingertips about all these other traditions.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's again why I think a degrees of the truth approach is really helpful, because you could be overly committed to just your one tradition and think, okay, Catholicism is the one true religion. I mean, which could make you very arrogant and bombastic and so on. On the other hand, you could say, oh, well, everything's true, which also isn't helpful either,
Yeah.
to just say that, and to not make any discrimination between, say, voodoo and the theology of Thomas Aquinas. I mean, we need to make those distinctions with love, of course. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Pope John the 23rd said just this famous quote of his. He said, in essentials, unity, and non-essentials, liberty, and in all things, charity, compassion. Yeah, that's another good sort of guideline.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned something that I think is so vital, which is that we're living in the internet age, which means that we have all of this information at our fingertips. And I think that going back to what we were saying earlier as well, that's a strength, but it's also a massive hindrance to the people who find themselves really wanting to. I find myself wanting to sip from the cup of many religions. And so, like you say, well, you sip from all of these cups, but are you finding the wellspring from which that water, originated? And that's a challenge, because even, again, I'm going to go back into, please advise me spiritually, because, even just going back to study the Master of Divinity, I'm very interested in almost subserviating myself to the Christian path. I'm open to that as a way of getting to that well. I'm open to following the path that Christianity has laid out to see. Not, and I've made this very clear to all of my teachers, that I'm no believer yet, you might say. I'm here to ask questions. I'm here for you to teach me, and I'm here to learn. But nonetheless, as a creative individual, as somebody who I believe that the role that I play is much more in the mystic tradition than the academic tradition. Yeah. It's very difficult to find teachers who I believe can give me that kind of water to drink, and it's very difficult to find a place that is, well, this is why one of my teachers at university I really favor, because she says, well, we're doing this assignment in each of our classes, and you can either do a massive essay or you can do an artistic project or poetry or music. And to me, that is perfect, because it allows me to say, okay, I'm not the academic, I'm the poet, I'm the musician, and I need to speak about God through those means.
Yes. Yeah.
And so do you think that it's even possible for universities in our current worldview to keep up with the need that Christianity has for that living water to flow back into it? Or have we become a little bit too incestuous, creating academics for the purpose of creating more academics for the creative? Do you know what I mean?
There's a real danger there. That's, we can develop our own little, academic silos, or even if those silos interact, maybe they're not getting at really, it's all becoming head knowledge. I mean, it's not really relating to real human beings and their struggles and their suffering. And, that's why I love spiritual direction, because you're dealing with real human beings with the real problems. There can be just a whole ivory tower approach to things, which, really works for a while until you run into real suffering, like you are diagnosed with cancer, or you get in a car accident, or your wife leaves you or something. I mean, academics really, I mean, if you're living from the eyebrows up, you can't deal with that kind of stuff very easily. The real suffering that can happen. And that's where religion is about, it's always been about how do we handle suffering? How do we handle the dark side of life? And also, extreme joy as well. I don't know if you're into the Psalms at all, but the Psalms have pretty much every human emotion, all the way from the most joyful to the most depressed, and so yeah, that appeals to the heart. I mean, religion deals with the heart and the mind. Wisdom is about both heart and mind and body, and yeah. You don't want to just live from the eyebrows up, just be a total head person. I mean,
I think that's one thing that I've found so fascinating about the Psalms is it really hit me in the face when I started saying, oh gosh, they're writing about lament. They're crying and suffering deeply, and I wonder what you think about the need for us to return from that to that very well. Jordan Peterson says something interesting. He puts it that we need to allow the Dionysian back into the religious traditions. We need to allow ourselves to, which is why I thought that it was so beautiful that a cathedral, a Roman Catholic cathedral, recently invited me to read some of my poetry accompanied by organ in the cathedral. We didn't get to do it because with the floods here recently, they had $100,000 worth of damage to their organ. But the point was they were willing to let me, an outsider, into the cathedral to bring some new life through my poetry. And could you maybe speak to the need for us to reinvigorate these traditions with that truly heart-centered emotion, visceral emotion, and maybe even the need for lament in a time such as today?
Yeah, well, for sure. So many people are lamenting about the Ukraine right now. It's just shocking what's happened there. And yeah, you can bring your laments to God, your joy to God, your anger to God. I mean, lamenting is part of life, so all those things, God can handle all those things. And
can I add something to this question?
Yes,
because you mentioned you can bring your anger to God, you can bring your lament to God. Something that I see so often in atheists is it's that big question, if God exists, well, why is there suffering? And my response to that is always to think, well, hang on, suffering or not, that doesn't prove or disprove God. Just the fact that there is suffering. I mean, suffering might just be a part of the thing that God's created. And if that's true, then the question or the thing that you're really saying is, I'm angry at God.
Yeah, exactly.
And it seems as though that's a really interesting idea that you give there, that we can bring our anger to God. I wonder if you could expand on that. How does that interact with this idea that why is there suffering in the world, I guess?
Right. Well, two things. First of all, God wants us to be real. I mean, with God, God wants a real relationship with us. And if we're feeling angry, I mean, in a real relationship, you should be able to express your anger and have that received by the other person. You don't want to verbally abuse them in any way, but we have to respect God while we're bringing our anger to God. But the Psalms are full of anger too. And what was the other thing I was going to say? You could ask an atheist, why are things so fabulous? If there's no God, why are things so fabulous? I mean, you think of the International Space Station. I mean, that's like, think of, we're living in a universe with 125 billion galaxies. I mean, there's beauty, there's weddings, there's, people giving birth to children, there's all kinds of strange and wonderful animals. I mean, why is life so amazing? I mean, what I would say to an atheist about suffering is that suffering is usually caused by humans of our own free will, and God doesn't force us. God never takes away our free will. We can reject God, we can turn away, we can do nasty things to other people. But also there's suffering that's caused by nature. And, I think it's important to distinguish between God and nature. I mean, nature just kind of goes on and does its thing. If there's an avalanche, I mean, it doesn't care if the avalanche doesn't care if there's people in the way, or a pandemic doesn't care that this is killing millions of people. That's just nature doing its thing. So those are the two main causes of suffering, and God doesn't want or cause suffering. I mean, I mean, somebody said to Teresa of Avila, she's being forced to answer questions by the Inquisition, right? And they said, "Do you believe there's a hell?" And she said, "Yes." And then she whispered to one of the other nuns, "But I don't think there's anybody in it." I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense. If God is our Father and we're God's children, how could God be happy if even one of his children was in hell, eternal torture? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So I believe that, I guess if you kept on resisting God, rejecting God, that would be hell in itself. So maybe, but I mean, I think God always reaches out to us in love and tries to draw us into being with God, So I'm sure that in the afterlife, I mean, in this life, God is constantly trying to lead us towards God in many different ways. And I'm sure that probably in the afterlife, we get more, leading and drawing by God to, if we haven't yet made that commitment, that, God would break through somehow and save us from hell. So I think there might be a hell. Hell would be constantly for all eternity resisting God, but I think that's impossible, really. So some people may disagree on that, but yeah, hell is kind of, I mean, we create our own hell or heaven on earth just by the choices we make, really. You can see heaven or hell starting on earth by, there are people who aren't happy unless they're miserable. So they're creating their own hell. And there's people who can go through great suffering and they're still joyful, humble, compassionate, loving people, So,
yeah. So it seems to me like you kind of fall somewhere in between the two perspectives, that heaven and hell are a place after life, or heaven and hell are a place that we create here, that we can inhabit here on earth or in this life.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So you're kind of in between there?
Yeah. Not only that, but heaven and hell are within us, God and the devil. I don't want to get too, anthropomorphic here, but, there are evil spirits. Evil spirits are things like unholy anger. There can be holy anger. Evil spirits are things like unholy anger, lust, greed, envy, etc. Holy spirits are like, joy, love, peace, wisdom, forgiveness, kindness, patience, and so on. So these things are right inside us. They're not just, by the choices we make, we can make ourselves internally miserable or internally happy, but also usually our external world is a reflection of our inner world. And, it's people who are hurting that hurt other people and create wars and things because they're not at peace with themselves. They're not at peace with God. They're not at peace with other people. They're not at peace with themselves. And so they're just full of anger and resentment, and they cause all kinds of problems, which I think is what we're seeing with Vladimir Putin. You know, he's kind of a model of toxic masculinity. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next U.S. elections. I mean, if Trump gets in again, I don't know. You know, we're going to have two toxic masculine people running the world, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own visceral reactions even to these ideas of, you know, toxic masculinity and even the idea of you know, privilege. I think it can easily go down a road of guilt, you know, guilt tripping. Well, I'm white, so I should feel guilty for, you know, and even just the attribution of group characteristics or group guilt to a, you know, it's like, not all white people have it so great. You know what I mean?
Go, yeah. Exactly.
And not all you know, not all black people have it so bad. You know, it's like we're all on our own individual little paths of challenges and successes, and but I mean, to your point, I think that you're right that we have so many challenges ahead of us, and my sense has been that. And this is something I'm trying to discover, not something that I'm asserting as a belief particularly, but my sense has been that this conception of God as the unifying force, you know, the culture needs to have something at its center, which everybody can agree on, that we are aiming at the highest possible good together. My sense is that is the one solution that we need, that we may possibly not find in time. and we're living in a very chaotic time where we're so fragmented, certainly in a time of Babel, you might say, where we no longer understand each other. And how do we understand each other? Well, we need to find some sort of common unifying force that pulls us together, where we can all say, yes, we want the best, but how do you even agree on what is the best? What is that to aim at? And so my sense from your work so far is that you're on the mission of trying to pull people into that vision of, you know, there's something better here that we can move towards, right?
Yeah. I keep asking the question in my book, like, why would we love anything more than God? You know, I mean, God is the rock. God is eternal. God is absolute love, goodness, kindness, patience, all those virtues. God has them to the max, you know. And that's what people really want. I mean, as I say in the first chapter, you know, and I follow Francis de Sales' format. He has, within the treatise on the love of God, which my book is just a commentary on. I mean, I shouldn't say it's just a commentary on. I mean, I'm trying to bring in 400 years of, you know, development since he wrote it in 1616. But I mean, sometimes we get deluded by our societies, you know, that, you know, fame and fortune are where it's at. But what's really the true good for us is these virtues. And God is these virtues. God is wisdom, peace, joy, love, kindness, forgiveness, and so on. And so what everybody wants, I think, atheists might disagree, but I think they're searching for absolute love, absolute truth, absolute wisdom. They're searching for God. They may not acknowledge that, but you know, the difference between an atheist and, say, a Christian is, you know, we've just taken the blinders off. We realize what we're all really seeking for, whereas atheists are seeking for that too. They're seeking for God. They just don't acknowledge it, you know. And there can be very good reasons for being an atheist. I mean, maybe you've been hurt by the church, or maybe you never had any religious upbringing at all, or all you hear about religion is what you get in the media. It's all these sex scandals, and in Canada now, residential schools, you know, where we took Indigenous people out of their native homes and put them in residential schools and tried to convert them to, you know, white values.
Mm.
So there's been, I mean, religion brings out the best and the worst in people. And there are lots of Christians who have a black and white approach to truth, and they're fundamentalists, and they basically hate everybody who disagrees with them.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem. And there's no perfect church. There's no perfect, pope or, priest or bishop or minister. We're all, flawed and wonderful at the same time somehow. We're glorious and messed up at the same time,
Yeah.
So
Well, I think that's a very, sorry, go on.
I'm just going to say, wherever you get human beings, you're going to have both joy and pain, basically.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's something that people stumble across so much on their path to any sort of spiritual discovery or personal growth, is just looking and saying, well, if your claim that what we all want is ultimate love and peace and joy, and if your claim is that you've found a path to that, but then your religion, your community doesn't necessarily show that in their actions.
Yeah.
But I think what the way that I've kind of gotten past that is to recognize that it's a very personal journey that you have to go on.
Yeah.
And just because there's a whole bunch of people who are hypocrites doesn't mean that you have to be a hypocrite. And if somebody is holding out their hand saying, hey, what I've got in my hand right here is a path that can lead you towards enlightenment, alignment, atonement, oneness, love, joy, peace, community, all of these things in this one little handful right here, you've just got to go on that personal journey to find it. My question is kind of like the question that keeps on coming into my mind is, what could possibly be better than trying to actually seek that and to see if that's true? You don't have to turn into a hypocrite like everybody else, although you are going to, because we're all hypocrites in the final analysis. But you can at least start walking that path and seeing, is there something here that I could see if I would just strip myself of all of this resentment and hatred and ill-defined emotions that are keeping me away from seeing that the clear path in the middle amidst all the hypocrites and the chaos. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right about everybody being a hypocrite. I mean, sometimes people say, well, I don't attend church because there's so many hypocrites. And I like to say to them, well, there's always room for one more. Come on in.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody who criticizes other people as being hypocrites has to be absolutely morally pure, or they're just, speaking, they're deceiving themselves, basically. Nobody I know is completely, absolutely morally pure. So we're all hypocrites, Nobody lives up to their ideals, absolutely, as far as I can see. We're all trying to do our best, and we're all struggling, and we're all somewhere on a continuum of from being the worst sinner to being the greatest saint, but it's hopefully we're all moving, more towards sainthood. But you can go the other way too. So and create your own hell, create hell for other people. So
yeah. Well, Bruce, this has been such a pleasure. I want to be respectful of your time, and I said we'd go for about an hour here, and we're already at an hour 10. And this has been so much fun for me.
I could keep talking all night.
Yeah, well, listen, me too, which is why I have to stop. But it's been such a pleasure, and I really want to do a round 2. And it would just be great to continue the discussion, and because I have many questions continuing. And so just thank you. If you want to maybe just share with the audience who's listening, where they can grab your book, God's Ecstatic Love, and perhaps why they should. Yeah.
I mean, there's probably an Australian version of Amazon, right? I'm sure. So you can get it on Amazon. It might not be in bookstores, but there's also Barnes and Noble, which I guess is a major U.S. publisher.
Yeah.
yeah, just Google God's Ecstatic Love by Bruce Tallman, and or they can go to my website, which is www.brucetallman.com/books, and they can see the cover and the table of contents there, and the introduction to the book, and so on. So, yeah, and thank you again for inviting me, Simon. I mean, I think you're doing wonderful work, and this is really so needed. The type of work you're doing, just getting out there and asking people these deep, profound questions. I love the questions you ask me, and so I hope we do a round two. Because I have a lot more stuff I like to share, but.
Brilliant. Well, I have more questions. So,
yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I am but a seed on this path to to the forest, you might say. I'm trying to, I'm right at the bottom of this hierarchy of the Christian faith, but I'm trying to understand things. So,
well, good for you.
Thank you, Bruce.
It's wonderful you're taking an MDiv. So, again, thank you for inviting me and for the wonderful work you do.
You've been listening to the Walled Garden Podcast. If you'd like to attend any of our free meetups and events, or if you'd like to get one-on-one mentoring with either Sharon LaBelle, Kai Whiting, or myself, just go to thewalledgarden.com. But for now, don't forget to nourish those gardens in your mind.